This Quoircast Podcast episode is brought to you by Heretic Happy Hour, whose tagline is burning questions, not people. Join hosts Sean DeJaw, December Rose, Dr. Reverend Katie Valentine, Keith Giles, and myself, Matthew J. DiStefano, for a happy hour filled with quality conversation, fine fellowship, and perhaps even a laugh or two. Unapologetically irreverent and crass, yet sometimes profound, we make sure to pull no punches and leave no stones unturned as we discuss the Christian faith. But listener, beware. There will assuredly be some serious sacred cow tipping. If that sounds like your cup of tea, or bourbon if that's your thing, head on over to heretichappyhour.com to stay up to date with us. And be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast fix.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Nat Turney. I'm here with my brother, John. Say hey, John.
Hey, John.
You have to forgive me. I couldn't tee you up anything better than that because I have slept 3 hours in the last 48. So,
well, that's your own fault because I've watched your Facebook posts and I don't feel bad for you at all. I'm sorry.
Well, I didn't ask you to feel bad for me. I was just explaining.
You went and saw the Killers in Atlantic City. You got to hang out in New York. Did you go to any Broadway shows?
I did.
What did you see?
You're really going to be? Are you a Harry Potter guy?
Oh my God. Did you go see Harry Potter and the Cursed Child?
I absolutely did.
Oh, I fucking hate you now.
Yeah.
Oh.
You know why you're really going to hate me? Here's why you're really going to hate me.
Oh my God.
Because first of all, I haven't even said like the name of the podcast yet. This is not church, by the way, because if it was church, you'd have left by now. Well, you're really going to hate me because I've never seen a single Harry Potter movie or read a single Harry Potter book.
I honestly feel like we need to just end the podcast right now. I don't even know what to say.
I think we do. So, first of all, I had no idea. If you're thinking about this, by the way, all of you in podcast land, understand a couple things about Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. Okay. First of all, it's 3.5 hours long.
I don't care.
No, they trimmed it down from 5.5.
I still don't care. I would go to a 5.5 hour. I would do it.
Number two, it's not a musical.
Right.
I didn't know. I'm expecting them to burst into song at any given time. They never fucking did. Ever. I'm like, what the fuck kind of musical is this I'm watching? There's no one singing. And second of all, there was at least 35 moments where the entire audience gasped. And I was like, yeah, what's that about? Like, I didn't get the references. I mean, there's so many.
Well, with all my love of Harry Potter, and I have much love for Harry Potter, we do need to acknowledge J.K. Rowling's
overall shittiness.
Well, lately, right, the shittiness of her directed towards the transgender people, right? So yeah, I still love Harry Potter. I still love everything about Harry Potter, except her need to quantify male and female.
Yeah, she's still very. I mean, I'm hopeful that after some of the beatdown she took, after some of her more insensitive statements, that she's gone back and maybe looked into some stuff. And
yeah, and I would hope that this is a misstep by her. And yeah, I agree with you. I hope that at some point she stepped out and says, because I mean, come on, she came out later and said that Dumbledore is gay. So obviously she has a connection to the LGBTQIA+ community. But this whole like doubling down on women are women, men are men is really hurtful.
Yes.
And I hope someday.
Yeah, kind of kindergarten version of boys have a penis, girls have a vagina. That's the way it is.
Right.
I'm like,
yeah.
I will say this. I was simultaneously, and we'll get into the podcast because poor Maria's just sitting there going, what the hell, man? I will say this. I did take this away from the play. First of all, it's fantastic. I have never in my life seen special effects like this in a play before. And it's ridiculous. You won't believe your eyes. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's like watching a David Copperfield performance in a play. Like the stuff they pull off is stupid impressive.
I'd say the closest I ever saw was Beauty and the Beast, where they do the whole transformation from the beast to human. That was over 20 years ago, and that was amazing. So I can't imagine how much better it is.
There's a lot of time travel involved in this.
Oh, okay.
And so there's lots of going back and forth in time and things. It's crazy. And I was simultaneously, I will say this. So the two main characters in the play, I won't spoil anything, but it's the son of Malfoy. It's Harry Potter's son and Draco Malfoy's son, Scorpius, who are the main interests. And they imply heavily throughout this entire play that they are together. So I was like, on the one hand, I'm like, that's pretty cool. On the other hand, I was like, why don't they just, it was so heavily implied rather than just stated. You know what I mean? Like, as though they were still trying to kind of play both sides if they needed to. It was just an intense friendship. It was just a platonic love. Although I think the hint was that it transcended that. And I'm like, what? So even in 2013, it feels like we're still having to play these games where we're still having to go, well, let's leave them an out. Anyway,
2013? You mean 2023?
23. What the fuck year is it? I told you I haven't slept. I have spent 5 days. I have gone through 5 states and the District of Columbia.
I know. All right.
I have been up from the ass crack of dawn till way past the stroke of midnight. I've been on booze cruises in the harbor in New York City and seen celebrities. We got stuck in a huge crowd of people apparently waiting for the Jonas Brothers outside of a theater. Like,
okay, I have nothing to say about that.
People still care about the Jonas Brothers? But anyway, you know what we should do, John? Because
let's
now
do
that
the
it's
podcast.
Like 8 minutes into the podcast.
Let's do the podcast.
Let's get to this. We have a guest who's with us all the way from the United Kingdom. And so we don't want to keep her too late because, it's late there already, and we want to give her every opportunity. But we're pleased to be joined today by Maria Frnacesca French. And I'm going to read to you a little bit about her, and then we're going to jump straight into what I assume will be an amazing conversation. So here we go. As a post-Christian thinker and writer, Maria Frnacesca French has spent the tenure of her career in theological education as both professor and administrator, holding 2 MAs and a DMin. Maria has worked in innovative church context, planting, and denominational leadership, focused on the intersections of faith and culture, offering new forms for faith engagement and theological imagination that are viable and sustainable for an uncertain future, exploring radical theology and post-theist thought for the present and future of faith. And she has a new book out on Quoir that you did not include in this bio, John. So I blame you. And it's killing it from what I understand. What's the title of the book? Maria, what is the title of your new book? I know, we're breaking all the rules of podcasting.
That was such a formal bio. Oh my goodness, it's so formal. Yeah, that's me in a nutshell. That's me in the elevator pitch. Yeah, my new book, Safer Than the Known Way, A Post-Christian Journey. Yeah, that is the title. And thank you, because it is doing well. And I'm really, really pleased that it's resonating with people and speaking to people kind of where they're at. That's obviously always the point of anyone who writes a book for a particular time and place and, issue and demographic and all that. So yeah, thanks for having me on to talk about it.
Yeah, it's great. You have been held up by both Matt and Keith of Quoir as one of the poster children for how to do this well, how to promote books well, how to get a good launch. And I keep getting these little dig emails like, hey, pay attention to what Maria's doing. Like this is how you do this. I'm like, okay, why don't you just do it for me? Because I clearly suck at this. But yeah, I'm loving, first of all, I'm loving what Quoir's doing. And I'm loving every time that they pull in somebody who is interesting and fresh, and the things they're writing are on the edges, I think. So, if you wouldn't mind, maybe walk us through, just a little bit about the book, and then we'll see where that conversation takes us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the book was really born out of the work I've been doing for the last 10 plus years. And just to kind of date myself here, I just turned 40 this past February. And, my story isn't an uncommon one. I grew up in a very church context. I grew up, speaking of New York City, where you just were, I grew up in New York on Long Island in a very Italian Catholic community. And so I grew up Catholic, making all the sacraments. I was very interested to walk into cathedrals in my local parish. And, it was a sensory experience for me. I was very much like, oh my God, everyone's whispering and quiet and what lives in here. And it feels like something really big and special is important. Like just imagine, a young girl kind of walking into this just big building where God is supposed to be, not outside, but inside, And I was probably, people tell me that knew me as a kid that I had a bit of depth to me, and I always had these crazy questions about God and life. And then by the time I was around 12 or 13, my mom moved me and my sister onto a really large evangelical church on Long Island. And then, was full on kind of youth group kid, Jesus girl, like everything you can imagine from like a typical evangelical background. So in that sense, my story is not an uncommon one. And I think especially, the whole deconstruction community and the whole ex-evangelical community, when I got quote unquote saved, and if you're on the inside, you kind of understand what that language denotes and means. It was back in the 90s. I think it was like, I was 13 at like a youth group meeting and I raised my hand to say the sinner's prayer and it was like 1995 and it was like a while ago now. But I was such an intense kid and I was always so sold out to whatever it was that I decided to commit myself to. And so for the next decade of my life, I was just full on evangelical, evangelization mode, Bible club in my public high school. I was, a singer and a theater person. So everything I did was like Christian music and Jesus songs and, missions trips and just like purity culture, like everything you could think of. And then when I graduated, I went on to Bible college and then I sort of adopted a full-on Pentecostal expression of faith. I went to an Assembly of God school. And then after that, I went to seminary. And little by little, I started asking questions of the faith that I was engaging. And little by little, it was really a slow melt, where things just weren't holding up the way that they used to. And it was really over a period of time. And I eventually kind of shook that Pentecostal piece. And then I found myself very progressive evangelical because, all of a sudden I'm asking questions about LGBTQ rights and affirmation and inclusivity. And I'm asking questions of social justice and the poor and immigration and all of these things. And eventually I found myself post-evangelical and then eventually, which is what I write about in my book, post-Christian and post-theist and post-God. And that's very different from being atheist or agnostic or anti-God. And, I found my way into radical theology and post-theistic thought. And, it was over a period of like really over a decade where a lot of stuff in my life changed. And it wasn't an overnight thing and at the time, like we didn't have language like deconstruction. That's something new over the last few years. And I talk a lot about it in my book. But essentially what I'm trying to do in this book is, offer people new ways of engaging Christianity and God and faith that go way past what most people would imagine for that sort of thing. And usually this kind of thing, I mentioned radical theology and post-theistic thought. I mentioned deconstruction, but when I say deconstruction, I mean philosophical deconstruction a la the likes of Jacques Derrida and Mark Taylor and John Caputo. I'm very interested even to understand how, the deconstruction community came upon this phrase because it doesn't have much to do with like actual deconstruction. But that's another point, and a lot of this stuff usually gets stuck in the academy and in ivory tower situations and it stays there and it never actually makes it down to a pop culture level in accessible ways where these kinds of thoughts and ideas and concepts and theological frameworks can actually really truly be transformative and meaningful in the lives of everyday people. And so like faith crisis, the decline of Christianity, or at least a certain type of Christianity, this is nothing new. Like we've been seeing these stats for years, but the conversation on social media, the deconstruction TikToks, like this is all new, which means that the conversation is getting elevated to a level it never has been before just because of the medium that is being used. And so I wanted to take some time in my book and really compile work that I've been doing in communities, with churches, in theological education. I've really been around the block in terms of the work that I've done and really offer it up to a whole generation of people who are crushed by identity crisis of faith and asking what's next. And so that's what's in the book in a nutshell.
Yeah. It's interesting because I actually wrote in my book that's coming out in a couple of months on Quoir. I wrote that, in fact, I had to add a preface to it because of some of the pushback you get from people who are in the know, who will say, well, you're just using Derrida and misapplying or misusing. And so I put a preface in my book about how I came upon that term fairly innocently because it's very descriptive. I thought I made it up. I'm like, I had this thing that was my faith or a religious system, and I began to take it apart. And the point was, I was not constructing it; I was deconstructing it. And so I thought that made sense to me. So I started using that term, and then I heard other people start to use it. And it wasn't until a few years later that I remember listening to Peter Rollins talk about Derrida and his sort of take on and Derrida's there's some overlap, right?
Yeah.
I mean, for me, like, because Derrida's more focused on textual criticism, literary criticism, the meanings of words and how we arrive at those meanings and how they have sort of built-in hierarchies. And I think I have a quote from somebody that says essentially what we've been taught in Western culture is to think in very binary terms, and those binaries lead us to necessary hierarchies. And so Derrida's interested in tearing all that apart and saying, no, there's not some objective truth that we're comparing everything to. Everything is relative to everything else. And so we have to be careful with words. And I'm like, man, that makes a lot of sense, especially when you get into what seems to be the foundational issue for a lot of evangelical Christians, which is, the Bible says it, I believe it because it says it. And so now we really have to be mindful of the words we read, how we interpret them. So in that sense, I think it's applicable. But in a much more literal sense, it was taking apart an apparatus that seemed to no longer function and like find out where it went wrong. It's like kind of working a math problem backwards and going, okay, where did I forget to carry the one or I did something wrong and I ended up in this place that doesn't make sense to me. Anyway, all of that was to say, when you speak of like post-Christian, post-theist, Peter Rollins comes to mind for me.
Sure.
Caputo obviously comes to mind for me.
Yeah, of course.
And I wonder if you could do us a favor and give us your distinction, because I know that there will be those who will be, like you mentioned it quickly, but who will be also atheism. No, not atheism. Post-theist is not atheist. What would you? What's your distinction there?
Yeah, I mean, Jack Caputo talks a lot about post-theistic thought. Pete Rollins is a good friend, and he's someone who has endorsed the book, and his endorsement actually is on the first page of the book, and so that's been really wonderful.
Okay, love Pete.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of, there's a reason why, like, you have theist and you have atheist, which is atheist, and then you have post-theist. And with theism and atheism, it's on a single spectrum. It's on a continuum going back and forth. And that continuum is like a plane of existence and being and objectivity and, underlying consciousness and personhood and the interventionist God and the big other in the sky. Any phrase you want to use, it's going back and forth trying to answer question, does God exist? Theism, or does God not exist? Atheism. And essentially post-theism, to use maybe Caputo language and maybe some other, theologians who might fall under the postmodern category, we're doing theology post-metaphysics. So, after one has left the supernatural God in their dust, right? And this is Death of God coming out of Nietzsche. And then, of course, coming out of the 1960s Death of God movement with Altizer and Hamilton and Vahani and all those guys, which ultimately we're seeing, manifest in radical theology throughout the last half a century. But essentially, we're doing theology after the death of God. We're doing theology after the death of a metaphysical God and the big other who sort of lives in the sky. And so whereas traditional theists or traditional Christians ask, questions of existence, and atheists say, no, your God doesn't exist, post-theism just leaves that whole conversation in its dust and says, that's actually not even the point of faith or God. And someone like me, I'm more concerned with theological realities than empirical ones. I'm more concerned with theological realities rather than metaphysical ones. And like when you get in, I'm actually doing a whole metaphysics and post-Christianity series on my Patreon at the moment, because that is the question. That is always the knee-jerk question in these post-Christian conversation. What about metaphysics and all of these things? And I've been asked that a lot. And so I'm, trying to not even defend a place where I'm at. I'm so not about defending or debating, but people who are following my Patreon or any of the work I do are doing so because they're looking for new ways to speak about some of this stuff, and they're looking for new ways to articulate it. They can feel it, they can intuit, they can sense it, but they don't have really proper language for it. And so trying to give some new language to that. But yeah, essentially that's how I make that distinction. And in terms of like the post-Christian phrase, there's not a lot of people who are using that the way I am at the moment. When I see post-Christian being used, it's usually to denote like secular culture or godless culture. And I am trying to commandeer it back or reauthor it or whatever.
I'm with you. I think I consider myself post-Christian. I think John would consider himself post-Christian in the sense that I haven't left faith behind.
Right.
I haven't left Christ behind. I have left that corrupt, man-made religious structure. I'm leaving it behind. I have no use for it. I don't find any utility in it. And one of those things that Pete did for me was get me thinking about, I think, what he would maybe call the objectification of God.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is, and in fact, in one of his books, I think it was called The Idolatry of God.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It was like, okay, when we objectify God and we say he exists, and then we now place him as this object in some time or space, he's like, and only how Pete can say it with his beautiful Irish brogue, that God doesn't exist, that God is existence. I mean, that to me is a sort of...
say God insists, right? As opposed to...
Right, God insists, exactly. Yeah, and I think I've heard Pete say that as well. I'm sure he's well-read in Caputo.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that to me is a much more interesting conversation.
Absolutely.
Than somehow trying to defend the indefensible, which is, no. Now let's take apologetics and prove God exists through some equation.
Yeah, this is a total snooze to me. It's a total bore. I'm not interested. I don't get caught up in those conversations. People still ask me.
So boring, right?
Like, if you had a gun to your head, or if you had to answer, if you had to answer, what would you answer? And I'm like, I'm not answering this question. This isn't even a question I ask myself. I don't care about it. It is so it's just obsolete. It does nothing.
Yeah, it's just pedantic and silly.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, and with the I'm going to bring it into kind of modern context with this movie that just came out, the Jesus Revolution, right? So Nat and I are products of the Jesus movement. I have a lot, and Nat and I both have a lot of connection to that movement. We have it locally with a place very close to me called the Lighthouse Ranch, which was part of the Jesus movement. But like Nat and I have talked about before, there are these movements that move to the point where they have to reconnect with a Jesus that understands us and understands the overall understanding of who we are within Christendom, right? And so I think these movements have a moment where they actually connect to the more divine. And I think there was a moment where the Jesus movement actually connected with the divine, and then we lose it, right? And then, so all these, all the way up to this, what was the most recent revival that just happened? Yeah. The Ashbury revival, right? I think there is something connected to this idea of connecting to the divine. But then it becomes commercialized, or we need to make it bigger than it really is. And then we lose it, right? And so this idea of theism outside of Christianity, I think really rings true for me, because Nat and I have been through so many of these movements. Nat more than me, because I stepped out of the church at such an early age. But there's a movement after movement after movement trying to reconnect us to this Christian faith, as opposed to reconnecting to the divine. And so Nat and I, like I said, worked through the Jesus movement to the point where it was no longer viable, because any movement, if held on too long enough, just becomes a disaster.
Sure. And it's actually going back to, the Derrida reference, and I'm paraphrasing Derrida here, but essentially anytime we try and encapsulate something, anything within text, within a signifier, within a symbol, within a representation of it, it's already lost. Do you know what I mean? Like the shape of it, the realness of it, the aliveness of it is already lost. And essentially, that's what Pete was kind of saying with the idolatry of God. And that's what radical theology is, where something, where Christianity might say, or let's say confessional theology, because that is what radical theology exists to subvert, where conventional theology says, well, we know God and we can name God and, we can contain God in this word with these ideologies and these ideas. Radical theology says, well, no, actually, God, little g God, is unknowable and untamable and uncontainable and unnameable and unconditional, where we have made God conditional and all of these things. So I hear you there. For me, I wouldn't even say, well, you have Christianity and then you have real movements of the divine. Because for me, that is still like seeking out something metaphysical and supernatural far and away that we can still connect with, but it is still a matter of metaphysics, and it is still a matter of, something that we can't see, and that we are sort of saying, well, this is just a representation of it, but this is actually what it really is. And so I don't deny the experience of the divine for anyone, but I don't even use that language for myself. I'm saying let's even go past that kind of language, because again, to say the divine is just, for me, it's just a bigger way. It's just a more generous way of describing a big other. It's just not as small as God. It's because we've made it bigger. It's like saying the universe or divine or love with a capital L or, something like that.
Yeah.
But I totally hear what you're saying.
It's a difficult thing, I think. Maybe you've experienced this, but it's difficult to move people sometimes into this area of conversation, isn't it? Because it requires you to leave some stuff behind. You have to let go of some assumptions and some maybe what like Pete Enns might call the sin of certainty in his book. You've got to leave those certainties behind, right? And be willing to just step into a virtually completely unknown space. What I think is interesting about a book like yours and other things that people are writing is the ability to provide some language for us to navigate. Does that make sense? Because sometimes, I get this a lot in stuff that I write and things that I post or whatever. It's like I say something and I'll get a response. Oh, okay, that's what I've been experiencing. I just didn't really know how to describe it.
Yeah, I get that a lot.
I didn't know the words. Thank you for giving me language for what that is. You said you get that a lot, right?
Yeah. And I'm really thankful to hear that, because obviously the work is not about us. It's about doing the work for the sake of other people, and, that other people could find some sense of, healing and belonging after they've lived on the margins of one community for a very long time and then found themselves on the outside of it. When you just said before, it's a difficult place to get to in conversation. And obviously this requires we leave some stuff behind. Like, I totally agree with you on that. And, I think what people don't always understand, because it's funny, I've done so many podcasts on this book, and most of the podcasters always want to end with like, okay, if you had to leave our listeners with one thing, like if you only had one piece of advice to tell, so I've gotten, what's the one piece of advice? What's the one word? And I've gotten, what would you put on a billboard? Like, there's so many different ways that I've been asked this question. And like, for me, it's an impossible question to answer, because like where I've been in order to, at 39 years old, publish a book like this one, I've not only lived a massive amount of life and been around the block in like Christian contexts and different denominations and all of that. I've moved around a lot. I have taken huge risks. I've made split-second decisions. Like, I've lived in different places around the world. I pursued 2 master's degrees and a doctorate. Do you know what I mean? I've worked in churches. I worked in theological education as professor, as administrator. Like, I've experienced a lot of loneliness. I've experienced a lot of grief. I've had to do really big things all by myself. Like, sometimes I had a community around me. Sometimes I didn't. Like, it has been years of toiling and risk-taking and researching and studying and getting some things really wrong and getting some things really right. And to be able to put it all in a book like this and offer it to a community. Like, it's not a quick fix. It's not something that we can all of a sudden come to overnight. It's not something I can offer someone in a word or a billboard or like a soundbite kind of bumper sticker thought. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I think that is the difficulty of the conversation. That is the challenge of post-Christianity, is that it is an invitation to a life, not only with no certainty, but with absolutely no guarantee, because it refuses to promise the unpromisable, which Christianity and belief do all the time. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think that Christianity has done us a disservice that allows us to, or they want us to be able to find a conclusion, and that we can find a point where we're like, okay, we are all on the same page here. And if you understand God, whatever God is, he, she, they, them, it, I don't give a fuck what name you give it. If you're not willing to understand that this is an unknowable mystery that you are willing to know, then what's the point? Right? So we are continually looking for an answer to an unknowable answer as we move closer to the divine, as we move in. So there is this idea that we can move towards something, but as we move towards it, it causes us to ask more questions. And questions become the more important version of this, right? So Christianity that I grew up in, that Nat grew up in, that I'm assuming you grew up in, is that we want to have answers to these questions. And the better version of this is that we have questions without answers, and we continue to delve deeper and deeper and deeper. And that is, I think, way more important than finding a resolution.
Well, it's a hell of a lot more interesting, for sure.
And sometimes it gets closer to us. You know, you said, we get closer to it, whatever it is. But sometimes it also, gets closer to us. And that's the thing about deconstruction. And I know, Nat, you talked about textual and literary deconstruction. And that's kind of how it started out. But essentially, it started on the premise that, it was birthed out of a response to French structuralism, which was birthed out of a response to existentialism. Existentialism essentially being, all very individual, and they're not being really very postmodern, not really a meta-narrative to anything. And then structuralism comes along and says, no, we can only understand things in relationship to each other. There's a structure, there's a connectivity to everything. And then someone like Derrida comes on the scene and he goes, yeah, sure, their structure things are connected unless event happens, right? Unless that deconstructive moment happens that essentially is innate in all things. And it is the ability to totally self-combust at any given time, to blow to pieces and blow all of our assumptions to pieces, which means like it's not just the corner of the building that has blown off. The whole thing has been decimated. And now we find ourselves sitting in rubble and ruin and needing to build like from ground zero again. And like this is what this is the wager of deconstruction. This is the wager of lying in wait for that combustion moment whenever it should occur and enact upon us. And every time it does occur, we can't really anticipate it. We can't be ready for it, but we can, with our most earnest, honest hope, desire that we would experience it. And as it happens again and again, like throughout life, it's never the same. We're never the same. It's this beautiful, like spin adventure, drop down the rabbit hole sort of thing where nothing really makes sense, but it all makes sense because none of it makes this is faith. You know what I mean? And we can engage our Christianity. We can engage scripture. We can engage Christ. We can engage all of these things because now all of a sudden, historicity, facticity, things like existence, all these modern addictions to have to, formulate knowledge are off the table because it's all of a sudden not what matters anymore. And it's really wonderful and it's really freeing. And I think like the crux of my work is my passion for people who leave conservative and evangelical environments and sometimes even progressive liberal ones, because progressive and liberal Christianity has a whole set of problems of its own. And I talk a little bit about it in my book, but, essentially they're a part of a story that has held their identities, that has been their identity their entire life. And all of a sudden, somehow it's been debunked, or it's vaporized into the background, or it just doesn't show up the way it used to. Something has happened that has really killed it. And all of a sudden they step past it and they think, oh my God, who am I now? Who am I outside of like this Jesus person and this God that I have like devoted my whole life to? Because for most Christians, right, it's not just a part of their life. It's usually their entire identity. And if that no longer exists in that way, then it's like this crazy, insane identity crisis that ensues. So people usually, their only option is either I believe like this or I have to be an atheist. And post-Christianity is a way of continuing to engage that faith story that you have and that connection to Christianity while also being past it. And this is why I'm so passionate about the work, because I see people like in the deconstruction community and the ex-evangelical community, all of these people who are just falling through the cracks because they're flailing and they just don't know what to do after such a separation. And I think post-Christianity could be part of the next step for some of them.
Something that struck me as you were speaking is this: as soon as you say post-Christian, as soon as you pay, there's an assumption we mean moving beyond. But could it be as much a drawing away as a pulling back? Like, hey, I was sort of being pulled in by the gravity of this thing, and I was like, no, I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go any further into that. So could post-Christian just be pulling away from that structure, or pulling away from that thing, and intentionally going a different direction? I think we could run the risk of sounding, whether we intend to or not, as though we are progressing beyond. Like somehow we've got the right. No, we're going to keep going through this, and it's a little more linear. I don't think it's as linear as that. I think it's a little more chaotic, a little more string theory versus Newtonian physics.
Couldn't you say that post-Christianity started actually at the crucifixion in a weird way? Post-Christianity starts with the tearing of the veil.
Well, we could say, we could say post-Christianity starts with, the death of Jesus, really.
Yeah.
Certainly post-theism can begin, could we not say that post-theism can begin with the death of God?
Yeah. And that is the death of God. Yeah.
That is the radical departure from any other religious structure to that point, the death of God.
Right. And I think we all miss the point when we talk about this, the crucifixion of Jesus as like the ultimate, or the ultimate moment of Christianity. But I almost see it as the beginning of post-Christianity, meaning that Jesus, prior to any other religion, has shown us this idea that the divine, or whatever you want to call Jesus at that moment, is willing to sacrifice himself for the betterment of all humanity, which is not a normal story for any kind of faith. And so this idea that as Jesus is dying, that the veil is being torn. The veil is being torn between this idea of the mystical side, and the human side, or the more earthly side, right? And we are seeing the connection between the divine and the humanity. And so for me, in a lot of ways, that's the beginning of this idea of post-Christianity, even though, we can't use those words at that moment because the Christianity hasn't existed yet. But I really think that we could almost start there, right?
Yeah, we could start there. And a lot of theologians have, to be fair. And I think, like, for all intents and purposes, what we're talking about here, post-Christianity, is post a certain type of Christianity, right? We're not really saying we're post-first century, the way followers. We're saying we're kind of post-Western ideas and frameworks of Christianity. But I'm totally with you in that post moment. We can actually go through a lot of scripture and talk about those post moments, because with each generation going back, to the beginnings of the Hebrew scriptures, we can see God manifesting and showing up in different ways, in ways that God hadn't before in previous generations, because a new generation has come and they need different things from their God, and they have new ways of making meaning. and bringing justice in the world. So it's really beautiful, I think, when you look at it from that point.
Yeah, it seems to me too. So if you look at deconstruction, like I tend to look at deconstruction, and I'm going to guess that you kind of do too, that it's more a process than it ever is. I'm still waiting for the first schmuck to write a 10 easy steps to deconstruction book. You know what I'm saying? Like
they're out there, those blogs and stuff.
Oh my God. How to know if you're deconstructing right. Any of those things. I mean, that shit would just make me mad. Or the first, the opening of the first church of deconstruction or something. But, but I think most of us view this as an ongoing process.
Yeah.
With no particular end in sight. I mean, because it couldn't, I don't think it possibly could. But then that process seems baked in from the beginning.
Yeah.
And like you said, you can go back to the Hebrew scriptures and see people deconstructing their faith and reimagining what God looks like, and then also reimagining how they should or should not interact with this God. And then Jesus becomes sort of this prototypical deconstructionist who says, there are times to burn it all down. There are times when you just need to take a sledgehammer to the structure and start over. That's what makes me nervous is, and I think I've seen this with, and John and I have spoken about this a bunch, but I've seen this with movements that I think it pop up at certain times that I think are necessary in the moment. Like I needed a radical grace movement to unstick me from some, fundamentalist, very legalistic frameworks. But those movements eventually always get stuck themselves, it seems like.
Sure.
And then they have to be the ones we're deconstructing from next. So, and I'm not certain that we've learned any of those lessons. So we may look back in I think we're already starting to get tired of the word deconstruction. It's like,
it seems like it. I mean, what you said a moment ago about wanting to sort of clarify the post-Christian thing, and is it possible to kind of step back from it rather than kind of go through it and past it? And you wanted to be careful not to say we're evolving, past something and we're better than something or whatever. I'd like to clarify that too, because that is not my intention at all, to say we've evolved past something because we're better than it. In fact, I make it very clear that I'm not coming for anybody's faith or anybody's God. If someone's in the crux of evangelicalism and they're finding a meaningful faith engagement, like, my work isn't for them. Like, thumbs up, kudos to you, and I'm really happy for you. My work is for people who are literally trying to find new ways of engaging faith and the Christian narrative and ethos and values and everything that they've known about Christianity up until now, only they know they don't want it quite like that anymore. And they also know that they're not atheist. So how do we engage it in that way? And so in that sense, it's post-Christianity, because if someone pulls back and pulls away, like I do theological coaching for people where through my Patreon, where I'll meet with people once a month and I'll talk them through whatever theological conundrums they have. Not that they would think and believe like I would, but they come to the table with questions like, I don't really understand this in scripture. I don't really theologically understand this. Or can you help me talk this through about God and post-Christianity, whatever. And I got asked this question one time by a young girl, and she grew up evangelical, and she got on a call with me and she was like, I want to be an atheist. I was like, okay. She's like, please help me be an atheist. And I was like, all right, well, why aren't you one already? Like, why do you need my help? And it came out that she had moved past every kind of doctrinal thing she could think of, but she was still really scared of the hell that she claimed not to believe in anymore. And she wanted me to help dismantle some of those really toxic ideas of afterlife, which I can do. It's easy to do. It's easy for anyone to do. Just do a little bit of reading. It's quite simple, right? Just a little bit. And I asked her a few questions. I said, okay, so I just want to make sure here, you find nothing compelling about the Judeo-Christian scriptures. No, I don't. You don't find anything compelling about the life and the work of Jesus Christ. No, you don't find anything compelling about the imperatives. No, I don't. Okay, well then, sounds like atheism for you. Like, you don't want to be connected to the story anymore. You've made a decision of your own agency, of your sound mind. Like, this is where your peace is at. So let's do this for you. This is a good choice. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to pull people in a direction that is not for them. If they want to step away and be that atheist or agnostic, that's fine. A lot of people don't, and they feel forced to be in that category. So I'm trying to offer for people who feel forced to check a box that don't want to, and want to be, I guess, for lack of a better term, a little bit more fluid. Do you know what I mean? And not have to say, oh, I believe in this or I don't believe in this, or sign their name on dotted lines doctrinally, but want to go past talking about all that stuff because there are other things that matter more. So yeah, I'm definitely not trying to like have the number one way of looking at Christianity.
Well, I think at the end of the day, and that's also a cliche, right? At the end of the day,
when push comes to shove, John, when the rubber meets the road.
When push comes to shove, when the rubber meets the road, provided we aren't hating another group to make us feel better, I'm at the point where I just don't care where your theology lands, provided your theology doesn't hate somebody. Provided you aren't willing to other somebody to boost your version of theology. I no longer give a shit if your theology doesn't align with mine, provided that love is the basis of what you're doing. You can be an atheist. You can be an agnostic. You can be Muslim. You can be, Christian. You can be Taoist. You can be Buddhist. I no longer care, provided that the base and the core of your faith is built off of the foundation of love.
I mean, I totally agree.
And that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people read my book or who have followed my work for some time now. And what I do and kind of what I'm proposing and offering up, it's not for everyone. Like, I get it, but maybe some people will take bits of it, or they'll find peace or a dispensation of courage for their own journey in it. Do you know what I mean? Like, these are the kind of contributions I'm willing and hoping to make.
Yeah, I always sort of operate on the assumption that as long as things are working for you, then it's working for you. And one of the concessions I've had to make was to leave space for people in the future. And if I just do like a scorched earth policy against people I disagree with, when their moment of crisis of faith comes, I won't be someone they can trust to talk to about it, because I will live in the asshole someone who excoriated them in the past for something. I think the point is to leave the door open and say, listen, if things are working, it's working. There may come a time. I would put money on the fact there probably will come a time when these things don't work anymore. And then you might seek a book like this out and go, okay, now what do I do? Because a lot of this is built on presuppositions. For me, there were certain expectations of how things were supposed to work if I was a good boy and played by the rules. And there are times in your life when things begin to unravel and you go, okay, I did the things I was supposed to do. I played by the rules. I was a good boy, and this all still went to shit. Someone lied, And so everyone's deconstruction story, I know you know this. Everyone's is different, right? Everyone has their own impetus for why they do. Some people are just insatiably curious. They're never satisfied. So and I love that. Some of us are like, unless something drastic comes along to move me from this position, I'm probably going to stay here. But the odds are something drastic is coming. So, that's just the nature of the world.
Yeah. I mean, odds are something drastic has already come and happened. It's just people maybe try and ignore it. Speaking of Caputo, who we were talking about earlier, he talks about this, and I talk a lot about it in my book as well, this idea of haunting and ghosts and the specter. And, that there are ghosts that actually haunt what we think we know, and they haunt our theism, and, they haunt all these things, and they taunt us in a way. And he says, once your reality has been completely interrupted and disrupted by this sort of haunting, you can never go back to business as usual. Life will never be the same ever again. And you can try and deny it, and you could try and live like you're uninterrupted and that you haven't been haunted and awakened in some way to some whisper somewhere. But to do that would mean to live in utter despair. You know what I mean? Because you've already been tipped off that there might be a little bit more than you know or could ever even imagine. And so I think odds are people do hear, Tom Wright used to use this phrase. Tom Wright, New Testament scholar, used to use this phrase, echoes of a voice. You know what I mean? We hear the echo, we hear the whisper, and we turn around, and it's the moment we've turned around, it's gone. and we wait for it again. And, Caputo's the same way with his haunting and his ghosting. And so a lot of us, I think, have heard inklings of whispers and voices and echoes. We're just trying to figure out what's going on.
So let me ask you this. If you had to boil it all down into one state. No, I'm just kidding.
That is good.
I want to ask the good questions too. I mean, you can be honest, John. She can be honest, right? That would be an annoying hell question for me as a writer. Like, you want to boil my whole book down into one?
Oh yeah,
down into one easily digestible sentence. Come on, podcasters, do better, be better. Come on, man.
I mean, I get it. I get it where they're coming from. So I do my best to answer.
The only way John and I succeed is by throwing shade at other podcasters. So we are systematically climbing on the backs of others, just trying to scrap ahead to our.
I think that there's something to be said about this mystical or spiritual moment, right? I mean, I write about this in my spiritual moment of this moment where I'm driving to work. It's like 4:00 in the morning, and I'm at this, for lack of a better description, this moment where I just don't understand the connection to God, and I'm apologizing to God for it taking so long for me to understand God. And I have an audible, and I can't describe it. I don't know. I don't even know if I believe it anymore. But there was this moment, right, in my vehicle as I'm driving at 4:00 in the morning where God says, and I apologize for this taking so long. And God says, no, you're right on time, right? I don't know what that means. I don't even know if I believe that really happened anymore. But it is a moment in my journey with the divine that tells me that I'm okay. That even in that moment of uncertainty, even in that moment of I'm not sure what the fuck is going on anymore, something has reached out to me and said, no, you're okay.
Well, and see, you're saying now like, oh, I don't even know if I believe it, but something. And like, that's the beauty of all this, right? Because it's like, you don't have to necessarily believe in a happening or not, or in a particular reality or not, to be changed by it, to be transformed by it, to have it deeply matter for who we are and for it to be regenerative and formative and help us reconfigure a whole lot of things. So I think that's a really beautiful story. And I think one of the most beautiful bits about it is the fact that you're like, I don't know if it's real, but it changed me. Like, yes, I love that.
It was definitely one of those moments where it's like at the moment, everything changed, right? Everything about me and my connection to God as spirit or whatever you want to call it changed. But as I look back at it now, I can easily explain it away as like a moment of psychosis or me having like a breakdown. But at the same time, I can't disengage from it because there was a moment, there was something there. There was something that felt like a connection to the divine, God, whatever you want to call it. Even when I try to break it down and make it make sense to me now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because it was audible. It was, I don't even know how to describe it.
But see, that's the beauty of it. Like, cause now you just added, sometimes I can tell myself it was psychosis or it was in my head or it was just a moment I experienced. I mean, like, again, you don't have to pick either end of the spectrum. You don't have to pick it exists in this way and it was a supernatural moment, or it didn't exist at all and it was just totally a humanist moment in my. You don't have to choose. And like that is what this post-theist and post-Christian conversation is about, is that we get to talk about these things past metaphysical realities, past things that we can't actually speak of because it's unspeakable. But all that matters is that we were changed in that moment. More of our story was written and we understood ourselves better. Because of our engagement with Christianity, whatever it is in that moment. Do you know what I mean?
There is a tendency that I've had to fight, over the years to almost feel like you need to move past some of those experiences and like, no, I don't do that. Those, whatever they were and however they worked, they were useful and they were helpful at the time. And I think if there's a mistake in the Western Christian world there's always an attempt to to make those experiences repeatable.
Yeah, to crystallize them really. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that's
for all these things.
You have an event like what just recently happened at Asbury, and immediately people are flocking to that place, and then they want to sustain it as long as they can, and it's almost like they didn't read the Bible, where it reminds me of the Mount of Transfiguration, where they want to build an altar.
Don't make an altar, like, to me in this place. Yeah,
it's like this is not something, however genuine it is or is not, it's not the issue. The issue is that for you to try and capitalize on it and keep it going and sort of maybe artificially keep it, it happened in Brownwood years ago. There's been multiple little pockets of these things that have happened. And, and if you've spent some time in, I know I have spent a bunch of time in, these sort of prophetic, charismatic circles. Yeah. And it's always seems to be pushing you towards chasing an experience. Sometimes to the detriment of everything else. We're just, we want to manufacture something, right?
Yeah, so much so. I wrote a Pathos piece on the Asbury revival. It went slightly viral. Oh, I didn't mean to rhyme there, but I did. Viral revival. You might be interested in it because I kind of talk past what God may or may not be doing and talk about what a revival like that actually tells us about the human need in general for something like this, and sort of ask people to respond, with empathy. Because, we saw like on both sides of the spectrum of that, right? Conservative Christianity and liberal Christianity, and they were arguing about what was really happening. And I'm like, hey, other questions be asked.
Well, the cynic in me wants to say, whatever's happening there isn't, and I have to resist that. I have to resist that because cynicism is not healthy, although it's a place I can go pretty easily.
I think we all can, yeah.
Yeah. But
Absolutely.
For me, cynicism always comes down to me somehow trying to assign motive to what people are doing. And I have no way of knowing that. That's a huge assumption on my part to assume I know the motivations of people doing the things they're doing. So I try to resist cynicism as much as I try to resist just Pollyanna optimism, So somewhere in the middle. And I try, like you said, you made a really, I think, probably one of the more profound things, you've said a bunch of profound things, but one of the more profound things you've said is, listen, we're not trying to crap on people's experiences here. Like, no one's trying to poo-poo. I'm not trying to attack people's faith. I have no interest in doing that. So if it's working, and if you left Asbury or whatever place and you left and that impacted you positively, and man, then more power to you. That's great. I happen to be pretty skeptical that things like that have any long-term impact. I think there's a lot of short-term impact, but they also tend to get hijacked by other bigger movements. And next thing you know, it's a big deal. But yeah, those kinds of things. So we talked briefly before we started recording. Also, you just so when we think about even like current politics, right? And there's seems to be a large group of these people that are embracing certain politicians are in that camp, using what they call the prophetic, which I'm not sure what that, if it is what they think it is, but to prop up, their particular brand of politics. What's your take on stuff like that? Are you as turned off as I am by that?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm willing to let a lot of people be in their faith, but that kind of context, I'll come for that context any day, because it is just so hateful and so violent and so misplaced and really, heretical. And idolatry, there's just so many awful things we can say about Trumpism and Christian white nationalism and all of these things. I'm not willing to say like, oh yeah, you do you in those situations, because they're causing real harm to our country, to people, to marginalized peoples, to our planet.
It comes down to that phrase, right? That phrase. Can't we just agree to disagree?
Yeah, no.
Up to a point, not there.
And I did a TikTok on this recently. I'll agree to disagree with things like you like pineapple on your pizza and I don't.
First of all, pineapple absolutely belongs on pizza, John, and
yes, it does. Yes, it does. Okay. Or you like the San Francisco Giants, which actually I should say, I like the San Francisco Giants and you like the Dodgers. I'll agree to disagree with you all day on that. That's fine.
That might be a bridge too far, John.
But if we're talking about people's lives and the way they are allowed to live or not live, when it comes to something like the LGBTQIA plus community, and you want to end it all with, well, let's just agree to disagree. I'm like, no, we're not going to agree to disagree.
Problem,
because you're wrong. You're just wrong.
It's fundamentally wrong.
Right. If you want to say that they don't have rights, if you want to say that they don't have the right to be human, to be who they are, and your response to that is, let's just agree to disagree, then my answer to you is no, because you're wrong. And I'll stand on that all day.
Well, and their disagreeing is putting people's lives at stake. So
right.
Whether it be reproductive rights, gun laws, I mean, the list is
exactly,
long.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
I
so
agree.
we get this within the Trump camp, right? Well, can't you just agree to disagree with me? No, I can't, because your side, where you're coming from, is a place of hate and destruction, and the potential death of people that I hold dear and love. And as long as we are on opposite sides of that, we will never agree to disagree. I'm not going to do that with you. And I will be more than happy to call you out.
I mean, I don't even, and I have a lot of criticisms of Western Christianity, certainly, but like Trumpism and Trump Christianity is, I mean, it's like off the map. You know what I mean? Like you can barely place it on the map of Western Christianity because it is so fucking extreme. So I have no time for it. I'll speak up against it any chance I can or get or am offered, or when I'm asked about it. You know, this is not something I'm like willing to let lie.
Yeah, amen. How long have you lived in the UK?
Since I married my husband, so 2.5 years ago, because he's British, and that's why we decided to.
I was just
start
curious
our lives there.
if having distance from some of that can help with some clarity too. Because I would imagine that viewing things that go down here from another nation. I know I've talked to friends of mine who are Canadian who are like, I don't get what the hell's going on there. Like we're in the middle of it going, we don't understand it really either. But people living outside the US are like flabbergasted. Like it is.
Yeah, well, I lived in south of France for 1.5 years, and then I lived in California for 2 years, and then I met my husband in the pandemic, and we married in the pandemic, and we moved here. So, like I said, I've moved around a lot. But I was I was in south of France when Trump was inaugurated, and I was with all my French friends.
And when you're like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah. And I mean, it was really surreal for me. And we're like watching it together on the TV, and they're like, what is happening? They're like, are you so glad you're here? Because at that point, we all just thought the world was going to end, like with this guy with having the nuclear codes and all of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was wild. And I remember when he got elected on that, I mean, I woke up the next morning feeling so... It was the first time I ever had a visceral reaction to something like that. I felt so like just disorientated, like I was hungover or something. That's how it felt. It was just really, really strange. But I've been in and out of the US, and even when I'm stateside, or when I was stateside, I traveled a lot. That has been like a marker of my life, has been travel and international travel. It's something that I've needed, and the jobs I've had, have included a lot of travel around the country and sometimes around the world. And I've been able to have some opportunities to live in other places. So yeah, I've observed American Christianity up close and from far away. I do have people in my life that are Trump supporters, and that's been hard. And the more time goes on, the less and less is on the table for us to talk about. And yeah, it's really difficult. And I know that they feel like what I do is like a cost of them and their faith. And
well, I mean, the moral equivalency stuff gets me when we're on the cusp of seeing a guy maybe be indicted for his illegal payoff of his, of an adult film star for his dalliance with her. Okay, we've left whatever moral high ground had existed before. John and I, my dad love him to death, but he's very right wing, and he and I had knockdown dragouts during the Bill Clinton years, about how character mattered, and I was ambivalent to the whole Bill Clinton thing. I'm like, I don't know what he does in his personal life is his personal life. I don't really care how he conducts his personal life.
That's sort of how I feel about it. I know.
Yeah, and I really don't care.
It's a private life for all of them. Do you know what I mean? It's private life for all of them. So
yeah, 20 years later, I look back on the Bill Clinton thing, and I'm upset with it for different reasons. Now I'm looking at it going, man, there's a guy in a position of power.
Yes, that is exactly how I see it.
Who used that position of power? Okay, that was
on a young girl, a young intern.
Right.
And
she was young and infatuated and naive, and he took advantage of that. And now I'm mad. I should have been mad then. I'm way madder now than I was then. Then it was like, hey, I don't approve, but it's in my business. And my dad was incensed, like this matters. If he would cheat on his wife, what else will he do? And it was all about character. And we had the last sort of knockdown drag out we had was that me flipping that conversation around going, I thought character mattered. I thought how this guy conducted his personal life would inform how he would live his public life. And I thought that mattered to you guys. And it just didn't. So now I see it never really mattered. It was only ever, we can put up with all kinds of junk when the guy is fighting battles on our behalf. But that's a side point. We'll see how it all we'll see how it all shakes out. But I do believe we'll look back on this objectively I don't think it'll take very long, but certainly we'll look back in 10 or 20 years and see that was the beginning of the end of the legitimacy of the evangelical church in America when they sold their soul for a seat at the table and showed everybody what really mattered to them, which was power and influence and not the gospel. So I guess I hope you enjoyed it.
Well, and what's scary is, and I still hold that this is going to be true. And I hope I'm wrong. I really do hope I'm wrong. But there's going to be a split within the political movement. And it's not going to be the split we think. It's going to be the split that the conservative Republicans are not conservative enough. And there will be a split into an ultra fascist conservative party. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope for all of the sake of all Americans that I'm wrong. But I feel like somewhere in the near future, there's going to be a split within the Republican Party. It's not going to be the Democratic Party. It's going to be the Republican Party. And it's going to be a split of you aren't conservative enough. You don't hold true to these anti-trans, anti-homophobic, or not anti-homophobic, xenophobic.
Well, that's not even conservative, though, is it? Do you know what I mean?
No, it's not.
That's Trumpism. Like that's not even a Republican tenet. That is like you said, ultra fascist, Trumpist ideology. So yeah, I think you're right. Because true Republicans feel like their party has been completely hijacked and co-opted by Trumpers and fascists. They don't like it any more than we do.
But the sad part is they aren't willing to stand up against this guy because they're scared to death of what would happen if there's a few. And I don't want to call out the whole Republican Party because there are a few. I'm completely blanking on her name. Cheney.
Well, they paid a dear price for that.
Yes, and she's no longer in any way there's no way that she's in any way in power, right? Because of her ability or her willingness to stand up against Trump. But every single one of these Republican conservatives who want to hold on to their place in power have aligned themselves in some way with Trump, which scares the shit out of me. I have never been more afraid of our government and where it's going than how the Republican Party has connected with Trump, who, by the way...
Well, they've aligned themselves with Trump because, he's the one who's being held up representing all these values. But the moment he's either locked up and in jail or removed from his, powerful whatever, like let's say it's Ron DeSantis next, you know what I mean? Like they're going to be loyal to that placeholder who represents and holds their values.
Well, and the scary part is in a lot of ways, DeSantis, or say Pence, they have much stronger conservative values, which I don't even like using that word. Trump, first of all, Trump's not a Republican. Trump has openly admitted that I could go down on the streets of New York and shoot whoever I want, and you still vote for me because you guys just are that enamored with me. But someone like DeSantis, or someone like Pence, who are more staunchly conservative than Trump ever was or will be.
Yeah,
they're going to quietly step into power, and in a lot of ways be worse. And that's the scary part for me.
The only saving grace of a guy like DeSantis or even a guy like Pence is they are ideologues. They do have, and I don't necessarily mean that in a positive way, but there can be some positives to that. Trump has no ideology. There's nothing he'll stand firm on and just be willing to take a bullet over. I mean, it's just, he's very pragmatic.
Yeah, he sells out to the highest bidder. Yeah. But to be honest, I don't know that I could pick a lesser of the evils between DeSantis and Trump. I don't know. Like with what DeSantis is doing with, regulating books and, Black history and critical race theory and all. I
think he's one step away from book burning. So he really is.
I've said before, there are people like DeSantis who on some levels frighten me more because they're just way more politically savvy than Trump ever is. Trump's a bludgeon. I mean, he's a freaking sledgehammer. And, he's managed to get done what he gets done just through sheer force of personality and will. But some of these other guys are pretty politically savvy. And they could do some stuff that's a little bit behind closed doors, might be a little bit more out of the public eye. And you look up and go, oh, shit. Oh, that just happened. And he's got us distracted over here. And I think Trump did that to some extent, dangle the shiny thing over here, make sure. And then meanwhile, he's stacking the Supreme Court with people who will overturn Roe v. Wade. I mean, that was a long-term, not just Trump, but that was a long-term Republican agenda for the better part of 30 years?
Sadly, you don't have to go that far back. I mean, Nat and I have been doing this podcast for about 2 years now. I have been very vocal in the beginning of this podcast saying that the Republican Party will never overturn Roe v. Wade because it's the red button that they need to help scare you into voting for them. And so what I think they have done is they have found something that can replace that. And that's transphobia, xenophobia, and the anti-LGBTQIA plus community. So because they now have that, they were able to go ahead and move forward with their reversal on Roe v. Wade. But up until they had something to take the place of the fear of Roe v. Wade, they never wanted to finalize it because that was their red button issue.
You never want to lose a good enemy, man.
Right. Well, they have a new red button issue, which is transphobia, right? That, how dare you have to worry about who's standing next to you in the bathroom?
Dear God.
Now that's the new phobia, Roe v. Wade, then they pushed forward and actually did what they did. But I not even 2 years ago, I was saying this is a red button issue that they will never overturn. Because as soon as they do, they lose your vote.
Well, it was unthinkable in 2023 that could be overturned.
Right.
Yeah, it still blows me away.
And I truly believe that they've just found a new enemy. So Roe v. Wade isn't their enemy anymore. Transphobia is their enemy now. Like I said, are you afraid of who's standing next to the urinal next to you, peeing or not peeing? I don't care.
Can I tell you something, John? The other night I was on a boat in New York City, and there were 500 really drunk people, and nobody cared who was peeing next to them. Because there was 2 bathrooms on a boat for 500 people who'd just been 3 hours drinking. It was like, hey, look around. I'm not joking. Look around the bathroom. It was like, they were just wherever you can find a spot. And nobody was like, oh my God, someone. So it was just like, okay. Of course, they were all pretty well, and they were pretty well hammered too. So that's a good place to stop, I think. We'll just talk about public urination on booze cruises in New York Harbor. Anyway, it was wow. Man, we did it. We ran the gamut, didn't we?
Covered a lot of ground. I like it.
I love it, man. I tell you what, we'll end it not by asking you to sum up the book, although I think you should come up with now. I think if you ever want to get into the bumper sticker market, that might be the way to go. Come up with some pithy sayings from the book. And if you're still listening, if you made it this far, and John and I haven't run you off, I know Maria didn't, but we might. We'll link to the book and everything in the show notes, everything that Maria's doing on Patreon and all the stuff, all the ways that she's continuing this post-Christian work. The book, again, Safer Than the Known Way, A Post-Christian Journey, is available now wherever they sell books. If you can, as we always say, if you can find one in your local bookstore, please, for the love of God, support local bookstores. But if you have to give Jeff Bezos your money, then so be it. We understand. Will there be an audiobook?
Yeah, I'm actually working with the narrator right now. I'm not doing it myself, unfortunately. Awesome. I would have loved to have done it myself, but there will be an audiobook. And if anyone does or has already picked it up from Amazon, please leave a rating and a review, because that sort of thing is so invaluable to a new author like myself. The goal is to get to 100, because that's when the algorithm on Amazon really starts moving things. And I think I'm at 36. And unfortunately, the UK site and the .com site and the .au site, they don't always talk to each other. So it's like in the UK, I have 22 reviews, and in the US, I have 36. And then I have the global rate. But so please leave a review.
The ratings are in. They're all pretty darn good. So
thank you.
And it's a good thing and it's a bad thing, right? At the same time, that the algorithm works off these reviews. I wish it would work off of just the quality of the book, because the book that you've written is well worth it. The algorithm should just work off of that. But anyone who's listening to this,
right?
Yeah, I know.
Jeff,
I wish. But that being said, rate and review the book if you purchased it.
And when you're done doing that, go on iTunes and rate and review the podcast.
Yes, that's true.
Exactly.
Because we appreciate all of that as well. So
we like really do. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate so much your time. Thanks for hanging out. I know it's late where you are, so we want to be respectful of your time. But thank you for hanging out. Wish you continued success. Hope you do great things with this book.
Thank you. It was really great to talk with you guys. Thank you so much for taking a look at the book and engaging me on the book. And thank you.
Hey, are you traveling at all in the future? Are you going to support this book in any conferences or like that?
I had a book launch night a few weeks ago here in Rugby at a really beautiful cathedral at the center of town, and it was really great, and I loved it. I'm actually coming out with a second book. It's meant to be a follow-up to this one in June, so really kind of close together. And so Safer Than the Known Way is kind of like a 30,000 foot look at all of this stuff, and the next one is like a collection of really essays I've written from post-Christian perspectives, anything on having to do with doctrine, to scripture, to how to engage death, to sexuality, to all of these things. Like, what does it look like filtering into various parts of our life? And so that'll come out. But I'm probably going to be stateside mid-May to early June, and I'll probably be doing some stuff then. So people can follow me on Instagram or Facebook and just kind of see what I'm up to and how to connect with me.
That sounds great. All right.
Yeah.
Well, we'll be on the lookout.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.